What is up, everyone? Back at Apple Valley Speedway. Stoked to finally have the car back out here after months and months of work. For 2020, the car finally has new bodywork and new suspension, so hopefully this piece of junk slides better than ever. So less talking, more drifting. Let's go. Well, day's not going super great so far. So, the bolt that holds the control arm of the knuckle just completely fell out of the knuckle. How the fuck did that happen? Everything was torqued to spec. Unfortunately, my first drift event in months ended in tragedy. As you can see here, a control arm bolt, the bolt that connects my SLR Ultra Angle Kit control arm to my steering knuckle, backed out of the car, and the car collapsed on the ground while I was going about 30 miles an hour. Unfortunately, when your suspension collapses, the bodywork of the car just falls on the ground, and in my case, fell right on top of the tire, which, since the control arm was no longer helping steer this thing, just went 90 degrees sideways. So the wheel here pushed backwards and buckled the fender really hard, then pushed forward and obviously blew out my corner light and thrashed my bumper and obviously broke my fender flare. But there's more to it than that, and in today's episode of Project E46, I'm going to be breaking this car down, seeing the true extent of the damages I've done to this car, unfortunately, and starting the repair process, because I have an event coming up in 2 weeks, so we gotta get jamming. So before I get into this, I want to thank two guys at the track who really helped me. They absolutely did not have to, but despite getting the red flag as my car broke down on track, apparently drifters don't know what a red flag is, and people kept sending it right at me and right at my car as I was trying to hook this thing up and get it off the track. But these two guys, I'll put their Instagram links right here. They really helped me out in getting my collapsed car off the track and getting me to a safe spot so I could figure out what was wrong with this thing. So big thanks to those guys. So for those curious, I was able to actually find the bolt that backed out of the control arm. Unfortunately, it was completely thrashed because all the threads got destroyed when it came out of the car at speed. But because I was able to find that bolt, I was at least able to jam it back into the steering knuckle and kind of put the wheel back closer to being the center of the fender line. You can see that even right now it's really loose and jacked up. But yeah, that way I was able to at least kind of roll the car onto a trailer and get this thing towed home. Yeah, but while doing that, I did notice some immediate damage right away. Obviously, my fender flare ate shit. Sucks, but that's not a big deal. More importantly, I did notice that my tire, I'm not sure if it debeaded or what happened, but it went flat. So we need to sort that out. Okay, let's take a look. You can see it's totally flat.
Tires debeading while drifting is very common, whether it's through body contact or having it off while on track. So let's air this tire back up and hope for the best.
All right, it took 35 PSI. I didn't hear it pop. Maybe it didn't debead. I don't know how it went flat though.
With that tire sorted out, it's time to remove the fender flare and check out the damage underneath.
All right, so I already ordered new fender flares. Fortunately, they're kind of cheap and disposable. We can see that the fender here, where the flares mount, when the tire came back like this, it just buckled the fender really hard. Up front here, the bumper took a lot of damage. The actual mount for the bumper on the inside of the bumper blew clean off, so the bumper's kind of hanging on. And inside of the fender here is all tweaked. the fender is actually supposed to be like straight here. It's totally buckled in, and the inside of the mount where the fender mounts onto the chassis is tweaked. And I think that's why the corner light blew out and this bumper trim broke. Visually, again, I kind of filmed some clips of this for a future video. I was going to talk about this, but I installed the SLR Ultra Angle kits. That's new. Tie rods, control arm bushing, and then the steering knuckle adapters. It's this bolt here that came out of the car. Man, for a bolt that fell out on track so easily, I'm surprised how tight it was in there. But this is the bolt. I have a better shot of it I'll cut to in a second here. But basically this stud has a nut on the bottom, and then obviously a little conical like washery thingy to fit inside the Heim joint for this control arm. It goes up the control arm, through the SLR kit angle adapter for the steering knuckle, and then into the steering knuckle itself. There's a little bolt on, or nut on top. The nut on the top came loose, gacked all the threads on this stud, and then the stud just dropped out the bottom. I can see damage to the control arm here because this is like one of the lowest hanging points. Basically looks like all the powder coat got scraped off. There's some superficial damage to the arm. I don't think it's anything serious. You can see there's a flat surface here on the bottom of the arm. That got all scraped up. I don't think that'll affect anything. It seems like it's fine. Fortunately, I think the SLR Angle kit is, the SLR kit is known as being like one of the best in the E36 and E46 community, and it seems really tough. It's just really unfortunate that that bolt decided to walk out on me. I've since learned, I guess, that this sort of hardware and this angle kit, the expectation, although it's not mentioned anywhere specifically, I've learned from other drifters that the expectation is that you are constantly checking these bolts. I mean, I checked them the day before the event, but I guess the drive to the event was enough to shake all this loose and have it come undone on me while I was driving. So if you're definitely looking at an SLR kit, be sure to keep that in mind. You need to constantly, I guess, check the hardware on these things. Not even the day before the event's enough. You need to check before the event, while you're at the event, and during the event. Apparently that's the expectation, but everything else for now looks okay. The coilover looks okay. This is one of the virtues, I guess, of having a spherical camber plate on top versus a stock strut top. Is because it has that bearing in the top of the camber plate, it allows the strut to articulate like that. So assuming the knuckle didn't pinch the strut body or anything like that, the articulation looks like it didn't do any damage, which is good. Alright, so that tire is holding 35 PSI for now. We'll come back to it in a second, but I need to get to work on this fender and hopefully get it a little bit more straight so I can kind of put everything back together. Because I think once the fender is straight, I can get the corner light back in and try and work on getting the bumper put back on the car properly. Well, it's pulling the fender back out, but man, that's just so ugly. All right, more hammer. Keep in mind, the flare sits over this. You don't see all this, even though it looks awful. But I did manage to pull this panel back out. Really ugly, but obviously it was ugly before, and then when a wheel went in and bent the crap out of it. So, I need to go through this, do some more fine tuning, if you want to call it that. I'll go to the front of the car and start working on the inside of the fender, the bumper mount, and the corner light mount. Alright, so you're now looking at the front portion of the fender. This is inside. This is where your fender liner normally would be. This is the bumper right here. This is where the corner light is supposed to sit. Now, you can see the fender itself right here is curved in about an inch. It normally kind of sits pretty much parallel with this body line here. And then additionally, when this fender curved in, it bent up this bracket here, which is supposed to sit parallel to the ground, like down here. So I need to straighten out the fender out here and then get this bracket squared away. Once I do this, I should be able to kind of make the corner light fit back into the car, because thankfully the corner light didn't actually break, it just popped out because the mounts took a beating on the inside. What's our access like? Not great. Let me grab my pliers. This is also quite thin sheet metal. because it's just part of the fender. Let me see if I can get the fender side of the sheet metal down a bit. Hopefully you guys can see. Okay. Oh, look at that. Actually, that's coming out quite nicely. So it's interesting, as I'm unbolting this, all the tension in the panel is coming up. So normally when you undo a bolt, the bolt comes down, but instead the fender's actually going up. So there's actually a lot of tension in this panel. Yeah, you can see, now that the bolt is out, that fender just went in, it got sucked in even tighter. So, fortunately, again, once you cut these fenders up to do fender flares, this becomes really malleable like that. So we're gonna bend it up like that. Oh yeah, see, that's really thin, flexible metal. That's working surprisingly well. Oh yeah, see how thin and flexible that is? Again, I'm not a pro body man, and this is a drift car, so you can get away with a lot of things you wouldn't normally do in a street car. But so yeah, I think we're basically there. So we got the fender squared away. It shouldn't rub on the tire anymore, hopefully. I'm going to put the fender liner back, at least partially, and then we're gonna get cracking on this bumper and the corner light and the headlight trim over here. The front bumper of this car is pretty simple. There's two bolts that go up through here and support the bumper by the bash bar itself. And then there are these like sliding brackets, one on each side, one here and one here, that kind of slide into a tab on the body of the car. Now, as you can see, this tab that slides into the body of the car broke clean off the bumper here. If you look, sorry, not the greatest shot. There's one right here, it's kind of loose and jiggly, but it's still on there. This one broke clean off. Now, I want to take a look at the other side and kind of see, can I mock this back in place? Did it break clean off? How do I get this to kind of go? All right, so you can see where the bumper mount once was. This is the piece. Obviously, this section's been cut off from me when I was clearancing the bumper and the fender for the angle kit and the wide wheels and tires. Let's see. So it should go like this. All right, so it kind of snaps in place. This might actually be an easy fix. So basically, there are these two tabs here that unfortunately did get damaged, but basically they slide onto this piece and they kind of, once they're in place, obviously clip into the body here. Now this is obviously really floppy still, so I need to find a way to secure this. And it might be going in the most drifter way possible. So my fix is going to trigger the purist, but the drift folks should know exactly what's up. I'm going to use some duct tape to just hold this in place. Now, I could do a plastic weld repair where I use a soldering iron, kind of melt the plastic together, but I actually need this to be a little bit sort of loose just because the fitment on the bumper actually isn't perfect from the get-go. And if it's too rigid, it won't actually line up with the body mounts perfectly. So this should be enough once it's actually installed on the car. Front bumper is back on, way less floppy. I was actually able to get the panel behind the fender squared away to get the headlight trim back on and the corner light back on. It's not perfect, but it actually wasn't perfect before. You can see the fender height is a little bit off, but it does all stick together, so that's good. So interestingly enough, I mentioned before that during a break on track, I was actually able to run back out on the track and find most of the broken off pieces on my car. I found the corner light, I found the bumper mount. I even found the stud that goes through the control arm that backed out. Now basically, as you saw before, if the control arm is here, the SLR steering knuckle adapter is here, then the steering knuckle is here, and another washer and a nut sits here. That nut is what backed off of this and allowed this stud to drop out through the bottom of the suspension, ultimately causing this failure. When I retrieved this, these threads were totally trash. As you'd expect, the nut basically backed off and then dropped the whole thing out. It trashed it. However, through some quick thinking, this nut, which one of the guys had in his toolbox actually is the same thread as this control arm stud. So we were able to kind of get it at least started on there initially in order to kind of hold the car together and get it off the track. Now that I'm back home and have a little more time, however, I thought to myself, well, I need to order a new stud and new hardware from SLR. That's gonna take a while. They're in Florida, they have to fill the order, ship it across the country, blah, 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 blah. That's gonna take a long time. In the interim, I already have this stud, it's already trashed. Why don't I try and make it work? I mean, what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? It was already set to be junked in the first case. So, using this nut the guys at the track gave me, I kept chasing it. Now, normally you use a tap and die kit on a stud or a nut like this, but I don't have one that's big enough. This is like an M16, I think. It's pretty big. But I had this nut that I didn't care about. So, I just chased it on here. I used some gear oil to lubricate it because it got really, really hot, and then just worked it back and forth like this until it went all the way down. Now granted, it still fights me, it's not perfect, but with a bit of effort, I was able to get the nut to go all the way down all the threads and kind of clean them up like this. Look at that. Nice cleaned up threads, or at least as clean as these used ones, thrashed ones could be.
So I grabbed a new lock nut from the hardware store and we were good to go.
But I've gone through the angle kit again with the new lock nut up top right there. And crucially, I've just gone through everything and double checked that it's all torqued to spec. Everything was, but everything else other than obviously the bolt backed out. But I also took this time to use a paint pen on all the key fasteners. That way I have a good quick reference of whether or not anything's walked out or moved. So I did to all the fasteners on this side. I'm gonna go to the other side of the car, the driver's side, and again, double check everything's nice and tight, and then use my paint pen to leave those marks. That way I can quickly check, like, has anything moved, has anything walked out of place? Yeah, it's kind of the update under here. Then I can get the car back on the ground.
Alright, after a few days of waiting, replacement fender flares have finally come in. I got them painted and bolted up onto the car, as you can see here, and here is the final look. It came out looking just as good as before. It's worth noting that due to slight variances in the eBay fender flares, as well as just the fact the fender is still pretty beat up behind all this, I was able to only straighten it out so much. It required a bit of work getting everything to fit right, but I ended up getting it looking just as good as it did before. And I'm pretty stoked because the car is good to go. It looks great, just like before. Check it out. As if it never happened. Kinda. Okay, so the drift car is all fixed. I drove it around the block and everything seems good. I even drove it to the tire shop and back and no issues. No rubbing, no scrubbing, no issues with the suspension. Everything stayed tight. This thing looks like it's ready to go drifting, and I'm definitely gonna go drifting soon. I have an event coming up this next weekend, and we're finally gonna get out there and see how this car drives with the new coils and the new angle, and hopefully I can actually get out there and drive without it falling apart again. In any case, that's all I got for this episode. Please stay tuned for the next episode where I go do more fun things with cars. See you guys next time. Bye.